Welcome back to another Wednesday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Wednesday host, Dieka, and this week we are talking about the cycles of nature and what that means to us. So, I want to start this by talking a little bit about what I think nature itself is, and then move into what those cycles are, and finally, what that means for me in my practice as a pagan. So, to start with, nature's one of those things that can be a little bit tricky to define. We talk about it a lot, and but what exactly it is hard to say. Now, for some people, it's anything that isn't related to humans, whatever humans have not been involved with. For me, that doesn't work though, because, well, first of all, there's very little on our planet that humans haven't had some sort of influence with. And even then, we evolved here as part of this world, as part of these ecosystems, and very much play a part like any other creature in the ecosystems that we're part of. So I don't think that we can really separate ourselves from nature. So, what I think nature is not a thing, not a place, but a process. And that process is what some call, and the term that I typically use for it is the great cycle. And that is the cycle of birth, growth, death, decay, and regeneration. And depending on who you are or what you are, and what level of you that you are looking at, that may look different. But we see on every level that we have access to seeing as humans this process happening, and that is the core and the context which that's too many witches. I think that everything else is occurring. So when we talk about the cycles, there's a lot of cycles happening within that. And for nature, again, we often think of it as being outside of humans, but I think that we very much are part of that. But things like the cycle of what our planet is going through. So the different temperatures that we're experiencing, the different amount of light as we move around the sun and as our moon moves around us. So we're looking at those cycles. Those are things that are reoccurring again and again. And those are occurring using some of the mega patterns. These are patterns that we see throughout nature, that occur at many, many different levels. So examples of spiraling or concentric circles, web, scatter pattern, waves, the cracking pattern. These are things that we see on many, many different levels, or the branching, for instance. Sort of the cliche example of that is the branching of our blood vessels to the branching of rivers, patterns that we see over and over again. And these patterns often are part of a larger cycle that's going on. And sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to identify what those cycles are, because they're not always happening on a time scale which is comfortable for us. We have what we're aware of. We think in terms of minutes and hours, days and years, but some cycles are happening in milliseconds, and some are happening over millions or perhaps billions of years. If we start to look at stars, for instance, which go through a life cycle of their creation and the maturation and eventually their decay, and from that, depending on what mass they are, what's going to happen to them next, but some form of rebirth, of regeneration happens, and another star is formed from that, or another thing is formed from that, and we see that on the very small scales as well. But for humans, it's difficult for us to look at that and see that cycle that's going on, or it might be difficult for us to see the carbon cycle that's happening, because that's also happening on a parts of it on a very long scale for what we are familiar with. So the cycles are not just the ones that sort of the classical ones, although the classical ones like the seasons or the moon, or the water cycle even are beautiful cycles which are fantastic to pay attention to and to really observe. They are just a few examples of these cycles that are happening all around us, which we are part of. And the ones that, or the one of them that we as humans, of course, we are touched by all of these cycles, but that we as animals go through. This is some Lion King stuff going on here, right? So our growth, our birth, and the growth that we go through as individuals, eventually we die, and from what was us, there is new life that comes, and it's not us anymore, but the life that was our bodies becomes part of something else. There is that rebirth that happens, and that doesn't just happen once. We think of it because that we as entities experience ourselves on this level as individuals, but that process is going on over and over with every cell in our body that comes into being, goes through its life cycle, dies and is broken down and created into a new thing. The resources that come through us are then used in something else, and that is nature, and nature works through those cycles. So for me, as a pagan, and my particular form of paganism is really about being aware of those processes, being aware of those cycles, and trying to really live those to the fullest, and observe those, be present with them, and understand them too in a way so that I'm not trying to fight against them, but working with them in a way that's going to help bring abundance and joy into my life and into the life of those that I care about. So that, I'm not really sure where else to go with that other than really practicing that awareness around it and being excited about constantly finding out more and learning more. And for every new thing about nature that we can learn, it seems like that just opens up 20 new questions, or 20 is a very small number, many, many more new questions for every new thing that we learn. So it's an exciting time, and it's a blessing, I think, to be a creature that gets to think about it. That this piece of nature, this piece of the universe, gets to look and wonder about itself.